So let's go ahead and start with tonight's lecture. We're at the point now where we're going to be wrapping up the presentations and information related to multi-view drawings. So tonight's work will include kind of a little bit of discussion about how these new pieces, the reflected ceiling plan and interior elevations, fit into multi-view drawings. But as you'll remember, these drawings really represented this orthogonal kind of or orthographic projection that included floor plan sections and elevations. The nice thing about these drawings were, up until now, we could test this information pretty readily with a scale by checking a size of something or looking at proportion and shape. And even though we could test them, we could see the pieces and how they work together by using those reliable tools of scale, shape, and proportion. Also remembering that these illustrations are not true to our normal vision. And so as we start next week, we'll be looking at perspective drawings. Just one additional note that I did have to drop out a couple lecture sessions, and so we're moving on into perspectives next week. But perspectives will give us an entirely different way of viewing things and much more user-friendly to the client. And so as a result, these types of drawings that we have been working with, the multi-view drawings, are used primarily by design professionals to work through design questions and relationships together. So as a result, certain aspects of the graphics need to be pretty clear. We need to know what we're emphasizing, what what is the important parts of our design that we're trying to get across to our clients or to our contractors or whoever's working in. So as a result, the readability is an important piece of that. So as I mentioned, tonight we're doing actually two parts of the of multi-view drawings. We're doing reflected ceiling plans and interior elevations. And just a quick note that when we think about interior elevations and we think about reflected ceiling plans, we are really limiting our discussion to pretty much interior applications. So last week we dealt with exterior conditions. In the section drawing, we did something similar. And even in the floor plan drawings, we dealt with the porch and the stairs and some of those elements, versus the work we're doing today and this week will be primarily focused on interior stuff. And that really is the strength that you'll need to develop as an interior designer, is understanding these drawings and how they impact the process of design. Okay, so here's some terms. I think you've seen these in the book. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the textbook. These are all being touched on again. Some of these are topics that were part of previous lectures as well. Okay, so let's, I'm going to be going back and forth just as a heads up as we're moving through this information. I will be going back and forth on interior elevations and on reflected ceiling plans. But I want you to understand the two are rather well woven together. And so, as I mentioned previously, these drawings really have a great deal to do with the interior conditions of the space or the object or building that we're working with. And so the thing that you need to remember is that these really are bounded by interior conditions. We're not so much concerned about sections or other aspects of that sort, so, or, you know, section cuts and exterior elevations. The plan will be referred to, but in the sense of developing this information, many of the tools that you've been learning over the last 2 class sessions will be applicable, especially as you view the videos for uh, the class assignments. So let's move on. All right, so we're going to start discussion on the reflected ceiling plans. Now, one of the things you might want to bear in mind is that a ceiling plan is not the same as a reflected ceiling plan. Both have the same view, or not, sorry, the same view. They have the same subject matter, but they have reversed views. And what happens is as you are standing in a space and you look up, you're actually getting a reverse view of the ceiling. So it comes in conflict with the floor plan down below. Believe it or not, when we look down, everything pretty much orients correctly. But by reversing our look and our vision and looking up, we actually reverse that. So what we do in a reflected ceiling plan is basically flip the axes so that the plan that is represented has an alignment and a relevance to the construction and the design below. And you'll see how that becomes important in a little bit. But understand, sometimes you'll see folks or hear folks talk about, well, we're going to just do some ceiling plans. They're really referring to reflected ceiling plans, and we'll talk about how they work and all that in just a bit. So just like with the floor plan, we cut, you know, a horizontal cut through the building, but instead of being done at a low level, like 3 or 4 feet above the floor, we're doing it really high, almost at a membrane or a very thin line that happens right at the ceiling. All right, and what that means is that when we cut that way, we're looking through the existing ceiling, or through, not the existing, but through the design ceiling to the plan below. So our reflected ceiling plan gives us a view of the ceiling elements, the ceiling design, and all those characteristics, as well as the elements below. Now, the ceiling condition also wants to include things like slopes and surfaces and fixtures and materials and all those other things. They become much more important as we get into what I'll say are the more technical aspects of these drawings, which occurs in the ID 220 class. But from the standpoint of what we're seeing a ceiling as being represented almost right on top of the floor plan elements. So we can see the stairs, we can see doors, we can see windows, all those things that are represented in the floor plan are also represented in the ceiling, reflected ceiling plan. So as a result, we want to be kind of thoughtful about how we look at the floor elements below. Sometimes these drawings get so busy that we need to edit out or select certain parts of the plan below to remove from the drawing so as to not add that much clutter and that much confusion to the viewer. But the great thing about it is that we're still able to use those same orthographic tools of scale and proportion and all that, and they still work for us in the same way as they did before. But if you'll just keep in mind that even though we're showing the floor plan below, our goal is to keep attention placed on what is happening at the ceiling. So to give you a couple thoughts on that. If you think about how lighting design is done, there's a very important relationship that lighting has to the functions and to the activities and things that are seen below. Or impacted by the lighting. So since lighting tends to want to be ceiling mounted, we use the reflected ceiling plan as a vehicle for illustrating how we want the lighting to function by placement and by orientation and some other, I'll say, design criteria. So things that need to be seen or things that do have a relationship to the ceiling or to lighting or those elements need to have connections that make sense. So that if you're saying, I want to have a dramatically lit fireplace, well, you'll need to see the fireplace and the mantle and all those things in that reflected ceiling plan in order to place lighting and make it work. All right. So as the slide implies, there's some things that we put in, some things we don't. But our goal is to mesh what's going on in the ceiling with things that are going on down below on the floor plan. Okay, so now I'm moving over to the topic of interior elevation drawings. I'm going to take a minute here and get a sip of water. Okay, so in these drawings, what we're doing again is focusing on the interior elements. We are assuming that much like we saw on what I'll say is the remnant elevations in our section drawings. Remember, we had a kitchen view that included some cabinets. We had a view of the fireplace and the doorway way at the back of the space. Those remnant views are really very similar to interior elevations. So as a result, what we're concerned about is making sure that the elements remain that the plane of the elevation remains parallel with the picture plane, very similar to the exterior elevations that we did last week. Again, we can use the same orthographic tools, the shape, size, and proportion. We are going to be more concerned about it having that, I'll say, thoughtful and relatable aspect of vertical and horizontal relationships. And so elements of the interior elevation become important for emphasizing, especially from an interior standpoint, what are the surfaces, what are the finish characteristics, and how are the relationship of the design features working together. So one of the things that I'm going to introduce you to here is that this little illustration at the bottom will help to provide you with some sense of placement and orientation. The things that, as we saw in the lecture and in the assignment last week for the exterior elevations, it is important that these types of drawings, elevation drawings as a category, are relatable to each other in a way that allows the viewer to connect some dots or connect some edges and make things work well together. And we use a tool that is very helpful. It's a symbol, and I'm going to direct your attention to it now with my cursor here. This symbol right here is very important, and that is like a roadmap for interior elevations. Now, I'm going to stop for a second and just kind of remind you that when we did last week's assignment, we were able to discuss the elevations from the standpoint of north, south, east, and west. And that relationship was found by use of the north arrow on your on the plans. And so we don't really, we have trouble using north, south, east, west on the interior. For example, when we do a north exterior elevation, it's very simple to say that face of the building looks north. And when we do an east elevation, then we're simply saying that side of the building faces east. But once you come inside the building and you try to do that, then the south facing is actually on the south facing interior elevation is on the north wall. And similarly, the east interior elevation is on the west wall. So it gets all wacky. So what we've done is we have a symbol, and as I mentioned, it's right here on this is a kind of a demonstrated floor plan. And what I want to draw your attention to here is that it's basically a box, and in the box is a circle. Now, in the assignment video, I'll go into more detail about how these work, and so you don't have to memorize this right now. What I think you should do is just kind of open your mind to it a little bit. But what I want you to observe is that there's a little point that occurs on each of these four corners. And this point is pointing to elevation A, which is from here to here. Elevation B points this way, and it's from here to here. You can see now from C is here to here, and D is here to here. Now, as we come over to the elevations that are actually generated, and we look at A, we see the pop out here, which might be similar to our solarium, is represented in A here and labeled as interior elevation A. And then as we rotate around the corner and look at elevation B, we see that there's an edge here, which is actually that corner. We have a second edge here, which is this corner, and a little bit of a step up that occurs right here. So that would be labeled B. C doesn't have, looks like, C has this step kind of seat thing, which is right here, and it looks like it has a pop-out overhead likewise. And so we can see that C takes on those characteristics. And then finally, D has this kind of triangular shape that is there. So I want you to pay attention to that, because that's going to be, that's an industry standard. That's how we navigate our way through these interior elevations. So as I mentioned, these really do represent an interior application. So they are very strongly bounded or designed by a boundary of elements. So we have the ceiling boundaries here. There's would be like beams that would be popping down in from the ceiling. We have walls, and then we have a base that's even represented here, like a wall base. Then we have the floor, another base and wall. And so we're not showing any cross-sectional representations in these drawings generally. We try not to. If we're going to draw a section, we draw a section. If we draw elevations, we try not to show the same thicknesses that occurred. Now, what you'll notice is if it were a section, all these pieces would be pochade. So we're not doing that. You're going to just see a very heavy line that outlines the profile of that interior elevation. So having said that, these drawings really do push the envelope on how much we can show on that one interior element, that one facade of the interior. And it does give us an opportunity to really focus in on the surfaces, designs, and finishes of that wall. Okay, so we've talked about this. I won't go into much more detail on it, except to say that, you know, we need to have all these parts correspond together. As we've talked about before, we can use our scale. All the drawings that you'll be working on today will be 1/4 inch scale. And what you'll find about the assignment is that they're very small drawings, so they shouldn't take very long. There's a little bit of, there's some tricks we'll see, and I'll go over them, and you'll see how it all works in the assignment. But hopefully you understand from what we're talking about that this is all about the interiors. This is your wheelhouse. This is where you guys make your living. So I want you to embrace this information and understand that it's going to have a prominent place in your professional careers. So understanding it now is a good thing to do. Okay, so now we're going to kind of go back to some ways of representing this information. And we're going to start with some, with the reflected ceiling plan. So we're going back to that topic. So as we do that, one of the things that hopefully we can understand is that your floor plan and your reflected ceiling plan are all going to be bounded by the same construction or the same design walls that you've already done. So as a result, this information is traceable. That means you can lay down your floor plan, you can outline it and trace it. I wouldn't draw it super heavy. I would draw it light so that you can remove the sheet underneath it, and then complete the drawing with more line weight applications. But the idea on it goes pretty quick. So that's an important piece. In so doing, we get that idea of looking at the ceiling plan components in relationship to the floor plans below it. And so we can use all the same graphic conventions we've used. We can align all the walls, all the openings, all those things, just like we did in the floor plan down below, except we're not having to scale it and measure it and scale it and measure it. And then draw all those different things. We can use the information we've already taken. So it is important that we think about the line weights. Now, those same rules apply. The light line weights that are used for heavy, medium, and light need to be applied to the drawing in a way that makes sense. So let me just suggest to you that as you trace the floor plans, think about what you're drawing and look at it as if it were looked at through some distance. Remember, in our elevations and sections, we talked about things that are further back and further away from the picture plane can be drawn with a lighter line, a medium to light line, depending on, how the drawing is configured, and heavy lines only for the section cut and in the prominent elements. Of course, we're going to want to use the same ideas of poche and all the other things that we've been doing in the class assignments relative to the title blocks and all those things. So we'll want to keep all those consistent as with the previous or consistent to the previous work that we've done. Okay, so now the graphic aspects of the interior elevations. As we talked about, we do have this this symbol. We'll need to key on that. There's that symbol blown up. I think I've already described kind of how it works. You'll see much more discussion of it in the assignment video. So hopefully that'll answer most of your questions there. But again, we want to make sure that the person looking at the information can follow how what order, what arrangement, what configuration you're using for the layout of these drawings. So as a result, we'll want to make sure that we use the tool and understand how it works with the floor plan. Okay, so as we kind of get down, a little bit further down the road with this, we're going to use the same ideas that we used for for the elevations and sections. So the idea that the boundary walls that we use on this need to create a framework like a box or a profile of the room that allows us to really frame that elevation and make it clear, you know, how, where things are and what are the boundaries specifically. Other aspects of this include the idea that, you know, the lines that are further away, they might be receding a bit, can be done a bit lighter. And so the line profiles that you use will need to be thoughtfully applied. The idea of space and depth can only really be applied with the use of line rates, so be thoughtful in that as well. And then it's nice sometimes to use use human scale in some of the design applications. We wouldn't want to necessarily do that in technical construction documents, but in a design drawing, they can be very useful. So as a result, I won't go through this in much detail. You know how to use the line rates. Please apply them to the drawings. And this slide you can see how that, you can see the weights of lines being applied. And the same thing, as I mentioned, the field depth of field is the same. Broken lines, we don't see them quite as much, but if so, they're going to follow the same rules that we would use for sections and elevations of other orthographic projections. And then the idea that we've talked about previously, that if the scale is small on the drawing, that we really want to try to be light with the detail. The larger the detail just causes a lot of confusion in a small drawing. But as we get larger, then we'll want to think about how much detail we provide so as to adequately describe the design and make sure that it's fully descriptive of the design features you want. And then, you know, same rule applies. Large people, lots of design. Small people, not so much design.